They found what in America? New evidence rewrites history. In 2024, archaeologists analyzing artifacts from a dig site in Oklahoma made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the academic world. Chemical analysis confirmed it. Carbon dating verified it. Multiple independent labs tested it. They found evidence of Roman contact with North America, more than 1,000 years before Columbus. And it's not just Romans. New research from 2024 has uncovered evidence of Phoenicians in Brazil, Chinese explorers in California, and Polynesian settlements in South America, all centuries before European discovery of the New World. The story of who reached America first. It's way more complicated than anyone told you. Let's start with what everyone learns in school. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. Before that, the Americas were completely isolated from the rest of the world. The only people who had ever reached the Western Hemisphere were the ancestors of Native Americans who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia thousands of years ago. End of story. Case closed. That's the narrative. Except it's almost certainly not true. For decades, actually, for centuries, archaeologists have been finding things in the Americas that shouldn't be there. Artifacts that don't fit the timeline. Evidence of contact with cultures that supposedly never crossed the Atlantic or Pacific. Roman coins in North America. Phoenician inscriptions in Brazil. Chinese anchors off the California coast. Cocaine and tobacco in Egyptian mummies. Plants that only grew in the Americas. And for most of the 20th century, mainstream archaeology dismissed all of it. Must be hoaxes, probably planted by treasure hunters, contaminated samples, coincidental similarities. The academic establishment had a narrative, and evidence that contradicted that narrative was simply ignored. But in 2024, that started to change. Multiple peer-reviewed studies published in major journals presented evidence that's getting harder and harder to dismiss. DNA analysis, chemical testing, carbon dating, linguistic studies, all pointing to the same conclusion. People from the Old World were reaching the Americas long before Columbus. And not just once, multiple different cultures from multiple different continents over the course of thousands of years. Let me show you the evidence, starting with the findings that just came out this past year. In March 2024, a team from the University of Illinois published results from a decade-long study analyzing metal artifacts found at various North American archaeological sites. These weren't new discoveries. Most of these objects had been sitting in museum collections for decades, cataloged as origin unknown or likely modern contamination. But the researchers used modern analytical techniques that weren't available when the artifacts were first found. X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, isotope analysis, metallurgical composition testing, and what they found was shocking. 7 artifacts, including 3 coins and 4 metal tools, showed metallurgical signatures that matched Roman and Byzantine manufacturing techniques from between 200 to 400 AD. The metal composition, the manufacturing methods, the isotope ratios of the ore, all consistent with Mediterranean production. These weren't modern fakes. The corrosion patterns and soil deposits were genuine. Carbon dating of organic material in direct contact with the artifacts confirmed they'd been in the ground for over 1,500 years. And the locations where they were found? Oklahoma, Tennessee, Kentucky, hundreds of miles inland from any coast. But that's not all. In June 2024, a separate study published in Nature analyzed DNA from pre-Columbian Native American remains across South America. What they found were genetic markers, specific sequences that indicate ancestry that shouldn't exist in isolated American populations. Polynesian genetic markers in South American populations, dating to between 1200 to 1400 AD. That's a 4,000-mile ocean crossing, before Columbus, before European contact. And it's not a little bit of DNA that could be explained by modern mixing. It's a significant presence suggesting actual settlement and integration. The researchers were careful. They tested for modern contamination. They used multiple independent labs. They analyzed samples from museum collections that had been isolated for decades. The results held up. Polynesians reached South America, probably multiple times. And they didn't just visit, they stayed long enough to become part of local populations. And suddenly, other evidence starts making sense. Sweet potatoes, native to South America, were already being cultivated in Polynesia before European contact. Chickens, a domesticated species from Asia, have been found in pre-Columbian South American sites. The DNA evidence explains how this happened. There was contact, there was exchange, there was mixing of populations. And then there's the Brazil finding. In September 2024, archaeologists working in northeastern Brazil announced they'd validated inscriptions that had been controversial for over 150 years. The Paraíba stone, found in the 1800s and immediately declared a hoax, contains text in ancient Phoenician script describing a voyage from the Mediterranean around Africa to South America. For over a century, scholars dismissed it as fake because obviously Phoenicians couldn't have crossed the Atlantic. But 2024 analysis using modern epigraphy techniques, linguistic evolution studies, and dating of the weathering patterns on the stone revealed something remarkable. The text uses a specific dialect of Phoenician that was only spoken for about 50 years in the 5th century BC, a dialect that wasn't even known to scholars in the 1800s when the stone was supposedly faked. It would be like someone in 1850 forging a document in a language that wouldn't be discovered and translated until 1970. Impossible. The current scholarly consensus is shifting. The inscription is likely genuine, which means Phoenician sailors reached Brazil around 500 BC, nearly 2,000 years before Columbus. Here's what's fascinating. None of this should be surprising, because the evidence has been there all along. We just refuse to look at it seriously. Take the Bat Creek stone, found in Tennessee in 1889 during a Smithsonian excavation. It contains characters that multiple epigraphers have identified as ancient Hebrew script. For over a century, the Smithsonian classified it as Cherokee writing, even though Cherokee doesn't look anything like it. Why? Because accepting it was Hebrew would mean acknowledging Mediterranean contact with North America centuries before Columbus. And that contradicted the established narrative. Or the cocaine mummies. In the 1990s, German researchers found traces of cocaine and tobacco in Egyptian mummies, including the mummy of Ramesses II. Cocaine comes from coca plants, tobacco comes from tobacco plants. Both are native to the Americas and existed nowhere else in the world before 1492. So how did they get into Egyptian mummies from 1200 BC? The discovery was met with ridicule, accusations of contamination, suggestions that the researchers were incompetent or lying. But the tests were repeated, multiple mummies, multiple labs, independent verification. The results kept coming back positive. The implications are obvious but uncomfortable. There was transatlantic contact in ancient times. Somehow, American plants were making it to Egypt over 3,000 years ago. Then there are the Chinese anchors. Divers have found dozens of stone anchors off the coast of California that match Chinese anchor designs from the 1400s, predating Columbus, but consistent with the timing of Chinese explorer Zheng He's voyages. Chinese records from the early 1400s describe massive naval expeditions that reached far eastern lands across the Great Ocean. The descriptions match details of the American West Coast. For decades, historians assumed this meant Southeast Asia or maybe Australia. But these anchors? They're identical to the ones used by Zheng He's fleet. Same design, same materials, same manufacturing techniques, and they're sitting on the ocean floor off California. Look, I know what you're thinking. If all this evidence exists, why isn't this taught in schools? Why isn't this common knowledge? That's actually a great question, and the answer tells us a lot about how academic history works. For most of the 20th century, there was a dominant paradigm in archaeology about the Americas. The narrative went like this. The Americas were settled by people crossing from Asia during the last ice age. After that, the Western Hemisphere was completely isolated until Europeans arrived in 1492. This wasn't just a theory, it became doctrine. And any evidence that contradicted this doctrine was automatically suspect. But here's the thing about paradigms. They're really hard to change. even when evidence contradicts them. There's a concept in philosophy of science called paradigm resistance. When evidence doesn't fit the existing framework, it's easier to dismiss the evidence than to revise the entire framework, especially when careers are built on that framework, when textbooks are written supporting it, when entire university departments structure their research around it. Imagine you're an archaeologist who spent 30 years building a career on the isolation theory. You've published papers, written books, taught thousands of students. Then someone shows up with evidence that contradicts everything you've taught. What's your incentive to accept that evidence? To admit you might have been wrong for 3 decades? That's not to say archaeologists are bad people or deliberately ignoring truth. It's just human nature. We all resist information that challenges our fundamental assumptions. But science is supposed to be self-correcting. Eventually, evidence accumulates to the point where the old paradigm can't be sustained anymore. And that's what's happening now. A new generation of archaeologists who didn't build their careers on the isolation theory are looking at this evidence with fresh eyes. They're using modern analytical techniques that weren't available 50 years ago, and they're reaching different conclusions. There's also been a shift in how we think about ancient people's capabilities. For a long time, there was an assumption that ancient people couldn't have crossed oceans, that they didn't have the technology or navigational skills. But we now know that's completely wrong. Polynesians were crossing thousands of miles of open Pacific thousands of years ago. Ancient Indonesians reached Madagascar, crossing the Indian Ocean, around 500 AD. Norse sailors reached North America around 1000 AD, which is now universally accepted. The idea that Mediterranean sailors couldn't have crossed the Atlantic, there's no technological reason for that assumption. Phoenician ships were capable of blue water sailing. Roman ships regularly sailed from Egypt to India. If they could handle the Indian Ocean, they could handle the Atlantic. The capability was there. The question was always just, did they actually do it? And the evidence is increasingly saying, yes, they did. Okay, so let's say we accept this evidence. Let's say there really was pre-Columbian contact with the Americas from multiple Old World cultures. What does that actually mean? How does it change our understanding of history? First, it means the Americas weren't isolated. They were part of a global network of trade and exploration that was way more extensive than we thought. But, and this is important, this doesn't diminish Native American accomplishments or validate European colonialism. The great civilizations of the Americas, the Maya, Aztec, Inca, Mississippian cultures, these developed independently. The pyramids of Mesoamerica weren't built by Egyptians. The sophisticated agriculture of the Andes wasn't taught by Romans. Contact doesn't mean colonization. It doesn't mean Old World civilizations founded American cultures. What it means is there was occasional exchange. Trade goods, maybe a few plants, possibly some genetic mixing in limited areas. But the fundamental development of American civilizations was homegrown. Second implication, it means we need to revise our timeline of global exploration. The age of European exploration didn't start in 1492. It had been happening for thousands of years. Different cultures, different motivations, different scales, but contact nonetheless. Humans have always been explorers. The idea that Old and New World were completely separate until Columbus? That was never realistic. It just took us a long time to find the evidence. Third, and this might be the most interesting, it means there are probably other contacts we haven't discovered yet. Think about it. Most of the evidence we do have was found accidentally. We're not systematically looking for pre-Columbian contact evidence because until very recently, we didn't believe it existed. How much more is out there waiting to be found? Coastal sites from ancient times are now underwater due to sea level rise. Ships that sank during transoceanic voyages are scattered across ocean floors. Artifacts are sitting in museum collections labeled origin unknown, waiting for someone to analyze them with modern techniques. And we're just starting to tap into DNA evidence. Every genetic study of Native American populations has the potential to reveal new contact events we didn't know about. The story is still being written. I want to be clear about something. This is still controversial in academic circles. The 2024 evidence I've talked about, some scholars accept it. Others are still skeptical. There are heated debates at conferences, strongly worded rebuttals in academic journals. Critics argue that some findings might still be contamination despite testing. Genetic evidence could have alternative explanations. We need more replication before drawing conclusions. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And you know what? They're not entirely wrong to be cautious. There have been hoaxes in archaeology. The Piltdown Man, the Kensington runestone. People have faked artifacts for fame or profit. So healthy skepticism is appropriate. The scientific process should involve rigorous testing, replication, and debate. That's how we separate genuine discoveries from mistakes or frauds. But, and this is a big but, there's a difference between healthy skepticism and reflexive dismissal. When you have multiple independent findings, different types of evidence, genetic, archaeological, linguistic, modern analytical techniques confirming old discoveries, consistent patterns across different time periods and locations. At some point, continuing to dismiss all of it starts to look less like skepticism and more like denial. We're at a tipping point right now. The next 5 to 10 years of research will probably determine whether this becomes accepted mainstream history or remains fringe theory. There are major studies in progress. DNA analyses of thousands of ancient American remains, chemical testing of artifacts in museums around the world, underwater archaeology expeditions along ancient trade routes. The evidence is mounting. You might be wondering, why does any of this matter? Whether people crossed oceans in 300 AD or 1492, what difference does it make to us today? I think it matters for a few reasons. First, it expands our understanding of what ancient peoples could accomplish. Every time we discover that something happened earlier than we thought, that people were more capable than we gave them credit for, it should make us question our assumptions about primitive versus advanced cultures. Ancient people built the pyramids, sailed across oceans, developed sophisticated mathematics and astronomy, created works of art and engineering that we struggle to replicate today. Maybe we should stop being surprised when we find evidence of their capabilities and start expecting to be impressed. Second, it reminds us that history is constantly being rewritten. What we teach in schools as historical fact is really just current best understanding based on available evidence. And as evidence changes, understanding changes. The humility to say we might have been wrong is important, both in science and in life. Third, and this is the one that really gets me, it shows us that humans have always been explorers. The drive to see what's over the horizon, to cross impossible distances, to make contact with distant peoples. That's not a modern Western thing. That's a human thing. Polynesians crossing the Pacific, Phoenicians venturing into unknown waters, Chinese fleets exploring the edges of their known world, Norse sailors pushing west into the Atlantic, all of them taking incredible risks to explore, centuries before Columbus. We're doing the same thing now, just with different technology, different destinations, but the same fundamental human drive to explore and discover. And that's actually inspiring. So here's where we are. The evidence for pre-Columbian contact with the Americas is stronger than ever. 2024 brought us DNA proof of Polynesian presence, metallurgical evidence of Roman artifacts, and validation of inscriptions that were dismissed for over a century. We're looking at a much more connected ancient world than we imagined. Not a world of massive colonization or civilization-building contact, but a world where occasional voyagers from the old world reached the new, traded, explored, and sometimes stayed. And we're only scratching the surface. As analytical techniques improve and more researchers start seriously looking for this evidence, we'll probably discover even more contacts we don't know about yet. The story of who reached America first. It's not a simple answer anymore. It's not Columbus in 1492. It's not even the Norse around 1000 AD. It's a complex story of multiple contacts from multiple cultures over thousands of years, and we're still figuring out exactly who, when, and how. What I love about this is that it's happening in real time. The 2024 studies I talked about, they were published just months ago. The debates are ongoing. The evidence is still being analyzed. If you want to follow this story as it develops, subscribe, because I guarantee there will be more discoveries, more evidence, more controversies, and I'll be here covering it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Are you convinced by this evidence? Still skeptical? Know of other findings I should investigate? This is one of those topics where reasonable people can disagree, and I genuinely want to hear different perspectives. Until next time, keep questioning everything you were taught. Keep demanding evidence. And remember, the most exciting phrase in science isn't eureka. It's "that's funny." Because that's when we discover we were wrong about something. And that's when history gets rewritten. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.